Okay, so I'm gonna switch over here, turn this on. Okay, gentlemen, we are rolling.
Well, welcome to a second installment of Talking with Strangers. My name is Kurt Jaros, and I know nothing of my guest. I haven't set up the interviews, and I've just got here basically a few show notes, some potential questions to ask, a almost blank pad of paper here, and my phone, not to research anything about my guest, but just to keep eyes on the clock. I've got the world clock up, and so this is a challenge for me in that. I have to learn about my guest, and looking forward to the conversation. It's also a way of demonstrating that in our highly tense society, whether that's a national society or even global society, sometimes people have forgotten how to talk to each other because we come in with our preconceived notions, the baggage we believe people bring to our conversations, and usually we don't even realize the baggage we bring to conversations. And so part of us here at Veracid Hill decided, hey, this could be a cool way to talk to people about issues without getting all tense about it and just having a conversation and showing the world that, hey, we can still be humans and chat with each other. So guest, thanks for coming on. My first question to you is, what's your first name?
Yeah. Hi, Kurt. My first name is Chris. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to the conversation.
And what state do you live in?
I live in Oregon currently.
Chris, what do you do for work?
Well, I am a youth pastor and a music producer. Those are kind of my two main jobs.
Okay. Tell me about the music producing.
Yeah, I work for a company called Loop Community. They're a worship track, backing track company for worship pastors, basically. So I take worship songs and break them down into their individual instrumental parts, recreate those parts, and then upload it, and that's sold to worship.
So that way you can have the musical instrument isolated if you wanted to do something different. Is that right?
Yeah. And the idea is, like, let's say you have a guy who's singing with an acoustic guitar and nothing else on Sunday morning, but you want to have drums and you want to have bass and you want to have female backups and all that, good kind of stuff the original master has. You can pick and choose what parts, you want to use and what you don't. So if your bassist,
so it could help
doesn't
smaller
show up Sunday
churches
morning,
punch above their weight with what they offer.
That's the hope. Yeah.
So what denomination, if it's denominational, what denomination are you part of?
Yeah, good question. We'll see if you know this. I'm part of the Free Methodist denomination.
Ah, the Free Methodists, yes. A historical Protestant denomination.
Yes. Yeah.
And
correct.
let's see if I can remember this. What caused the Free Methodists?
Man, if you know this, I'll be impressed, because most people don't know this. So.
Was it was it a break off of church governance? Did they not see let's see here.
Not entirely.
It wouldn't be baptism.
Nope. Good guess, though.
Oh man, I really should know this.
So there's actually, do you want me to tell you, or do you want to take another swing?
Yeah, go ahead. Save us some time.
Yeah. So there's actually 5 reasons for this split. It wasn't really a split. The founder of Free Methodism was thrown out of the Episcopal Methodist Church back in 1860. The main reason, though, I guess the 2 big reasons were, number one, over the idea that you could own people as slaves.
Okay.
Methodist Episcopal Church was in favor of slavery, and B.T. Roberts, the guy who founded Free Methodism, was one of the most advocate preachers to speak out against it at the time.
Yeah, abolitionist movement. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and he was thrown out of the church over that belief. And then the other part of it, too, was at the time, the Methodist Episcopal Church was making people pay for their spot in church, right? So the more money you gave, the closer you got to sit up front. Basically a rent-a-pew kind of system. And so B.T. Roberts said, hey, that's wrong. The poor are almost always excluded. Those who can't pay for a seat were sitting outside of the sanctuary most of the times, and just trying to hear in, kind of thing. And so that's the second big reason he was thrown out, is because he was an outspoken critic of that system as well.
Yeah. And rightly so. So yeah,
Yeah.
those are great reasons to be kicked out of a church structure. What got you interested in becoming a youth pastor?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. So my father was a pastor my whole life growing up in the Free Methodist Church. So I'm born and raised FM. And I grew up pastor's kid, and I hated the church for most of my childhood. I, got to see how the sausage is made behind the scenes in a lot of ways. And
so you decided to go work at the factory yourself.
Yeah, well, yeah, I didn't want to for most of my life, and I saw just my father went through some pretty hard churches and had some trauma associated with a lot of that, and as a lot of pastors do, and so I was angry at the church. I thought, man, if this is God's people, I mean, these people suck, just to be frank, right?
Yeah.
And so as I was kind of maturing in my teenage years, a couple of things happened to me. Number one, I fell into a pretty severe depression and attempted suicide. And then kind of beyond that, and after I came out of that and everything that entailed, I was listening to a guy talk about the church and about the American church at large, and he I guess reframed my views on it, where I had always seen the church as a broken and horrible, terrible system. He framed it as, well, these are, sure, these are God's people. That doesn't make them perfect, and that doesn't mean that they don't need Jesus as much as everybody else outside the church. And I think God actually broke my heart for the church in America. And it was at that moment I experienced what, a lot of people consider a calling or a call to ministry, a call to work with people. And instead of the anger and the hatred that I had, God really took that and turned it into love for people. And, that's kind of the long and short of it.
Yeah. One of the things I like to tell folks who complain, maybe not complain is the right word, although sometimes it's complaining, they might object to Christian belief because they say the church is full of hypocrites and, bad people. And I'm just like, exactly. It's like, show me a church that's perfect and you're not dealing with humans. So we are...
And even beyond that, show me any system that's perfect, that you're not dealing with humans, right? Even outside the scope of church, every community, every gathering of people in any capacity has bad apples, has broken people in it. That's what it means to be human right now, is that we have brokenness in us and we carry that brokenness. But that's no reason to break away from community, in my opinion.
You said you sort of had for a season you were dealing with severe depression.
Yep.
Tell me about that. Tell me about that season of life for you.
Sure, yeah. What's the best way to broach this?
Yeah, and as long as you're comfortable, of course, whatever, if you want to pass, that's totally fine.
No, I'm completely comfortable. Just want to give you all the correct details. So when I was pretty young, I want to say 13 or 14, I'm getting old now, so remembering back this far is a little difficult.
Sure.
But when I was 13 or 14, that was golden age of the internet, right? Everything was available on the internet for free, and there were very little guardrails in place for anybody at the time. And so I fell into a pretty bad porn addiction at the time, because everything was accessible and easy to find, right? And we had yet to figure out, parental blockers that you have on smartphones and things like that now.
Yeah.
This was desktop computer days, right? Dial-up speed internet. Yeah, you can't be on the phone and the computer at the same time, right? So I fell into a pretty bad porn addiction because of just the ease of access in our home to the internet, and I could get away with it, and it was something that for several years, I got away with, and I thought it was fine, and I thought this was just how every guy my age functions, right? This is a thing everybody does. And it got to the point where I was not able to function, at all, if I hadn't watched something 2 or 3 times a day, kind of thing. And so I would watch these videos and go to these websites and things like that. And if I didn't, I was, angry, and I couldn't get out of bed, kind of thing. I couldn't go out and see people. I didn't have any interest in that. And as that continued and progressed, I just isolated more and more. Broke off friendships, that kind of thing. Nothing that I enjoyed. I've been a musician since I was really young. I stopped playing music for a while because of this, because if it didn't involve feeding my addiction, right, then there wasn't any point in anything else at the time, to me. And so that kind of isolation and that kind of addiction is a perfect breeding ground for something like depression. And then you couple Christianity and some of the trauma I experienced in the church with that, right, of seeing it only as, oh, well, if you can't live up to this standard of perfection, right, then you're worthless and you're not worth anything. Not saying that is the tenet of Christianity, but that was what my adolescent brain could wrap around at the time. And so I began to feel worthless and insecure, and essentially all of this led to, over the course of 3 or 4 years, led to a place where I was in my room one night, and I decided, you know what, it's not worth it. I don't want to be here anymore. I'm just going to end it now. And so I attempted to cut my throat with a knife. Thankfully, I failed. And I think, if I'm being honest, it was God's provision that I failed and that I wasn't able to go through with it ultimately. And that was kind of a big wake-up call for me that something had to change in my life. Around that time, I was in high school at the time. I actually met my wife too, and she was the first person that I opened up to about my addiction, and about my feelings of being worthless and depressed. And to her credit, she didn't run away screaming, which she had every right to do as a high school student. She was a big part of my recovery, I think, from that. And it was around that time too that I began to have these pullings from the Spirit, I would say, about my attitude towards the church and my attitude towards Christianity and religion in general. I guess, is that helpful? That was
Thanks for sharing that. Very personal life experience, processing all of that. Sounds like you found a great woman, someone who came by your side, yes, and helped you along. And I've got a good buddy who has a similar situation with dealing with depression, and he had a learning disability growing up, and so he similarly attempted to take his life, actually twice. He's come around, and is doing great and is thriving now. So things are going well for him. But so I'm no stranger, although there are many folks who are strangers to stories like yours, and it's good to hear them, and to have them spoken of, so people realize, hey, there are hurting people out there, and we need to be good friends with folks so we can live life along them, to not just share in the joys, but in the struggles as well.
And if that's not the gospel, I don't know what is, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, if coming alongside people and being willing to walk with them in their worst moments, had it not been for my wife when we were young and some other people around us in my faith community, I wouldn't be able to talk to you today. So there is hope, I think, for everyone, but we do have to break out of our isolation sometimes and seek that hope and that help out.
Yeah. What do you consider yourself politically? What's your political philosophy?
Yeah. I both hate and love this question all at the same time. So I guess to get a wider sense of this, I wrote a book a couple years ago called Kingdom Over Empire, in which I think lots of my deconstruction in the faith comes through in that book. The book is about what it means to follow Jesus in the American empire today. And it deals a lot with politics. It was written during it was written between 2016 and 2020. So the Trumpian era, right, of politics. And that had a big influence on me. So I am an unaffiliated voter in Oregon, which is a fantastic thing that Oregon has. It means I don't have to tie myself to either political party. And personally, a conviction of mine from the scriptures is that you can't tie yourself as a Christian to either political party. You have to be willing to step in and criticize both, and to see the good and the bad in both. But at the same time, I don't want to give you the illusion that I'm saying I'm this very centrist, very moderate, both sides are right and both sides are wrong kind of issues. I think if anything, 2016 exposed a lot of, to me, and I guess 2016 to 2020 exposed a lot of the flaws and errors in conservative Christianity that has dominated the evangelical space for so long. I grew up in an extremely conservative household, like to the point where we couldn't celebrate Halloween because that was Satan's holiday,
even though you look into Christian history and it's based on Christian.
Well, exactly, right? That's the kind of thing. So so I grew up in that very conservative nature. I was raised in some of my adolescent years to believe that, and I don't believe this now, I just want to say this before I put it out on the internet, but there was a time where I believed, and people around me were telling me, Obama is the Antichrist, and you're going to see why as soon as he gets shot in the head and comes back from the dead 3 days later.
What?
That'll prove it.
Goodness.
So like I've been in that, like what would have been before we have a name for it now. It's MAGA conservative Christianity, right? We didn't have a name for it then, but those were the kinds of super heavy Rush Limbaugh talking points. I don't know if you're familiar with you're a Midwestern guy, so maybe you've heard of Bob Duco, and his radio show is a very, very big popular radio talk show, Christian conservative guy in Detroit, but those kinds of things, right? And coming out of that, I have found myself, I think people around me would call me a progressive or call me a liberal. I don't like to be labeled as that, but I have found more reconciliation in the teachings of Christ with some of the more progressive elements of our politics than I have in the conservative elements. Okay. So that was my really long roundabout answer.
There's a number of ways we could take this. Even though I'm interested in political philosophy, I really do try to avoid, well, first, I read widely. So I read a variety of sources, news outlets. I don't watch cable TV, so I'm not,
praise Jesus.
I mean, so one of the things, and I'm friends and family with folks that do, and, I like to tell them, you go to church for 1 hour a week, and you listen to your pastor give a sermon, but you listen to Tucker Carlson 5 nights a week. So who's really pastoring you? It sounds like, Tucker Carlson is pastoring you. And that's a big problem because people aren't reading widely. So even though I'm interested in following political news, I'm not partisan. I like to think about these issues more philosophically. And applying those philosophical principles. So I certainly sympathize with you when you say that that you as an unaffiliate voter believe we need to be able to call out the wrongs in each party and when it happens, because the reality is political parties shift over time. And so if it's true that Christ's teachings transcend time and culture, as cultural trends shift parties to different positions, we need to stay the course. And one example I like to give is the concept of immigration. In the 1980s, the Republican Party was far more or I'll even modify it, the perception of the Republican Party was far more pro-immigrant, whereas today the perception of the GOP is the party of anti-immigrants. Now, frequently Republicans will say, well, no, I support legal immigration. What I say is, if you have to like nuance your view or correct someone out the gate, then they have a perception of you. So you've got, in some ways, you haven't done a good enough job of being clear about your positions. And it's just because it's been anti-immigration. So I think the GOP has a big problem on its hands on that particular issue.
They've certainly got an image problem all the way around. Sure.
Well, I mean, all right. So here we'll have some things to disagree there. I think there's still some good there, but so getting back to what you said about Jesus, his teachings represent maybe some of the more, did you use the term progressive or left-wing policies? Is that a fair? Yeah.
Again, I want to say that I have found that Jesus's teachings oftentimes seem to align, at least in our current political climate, closer to progressive elements than they do to conservative elements.
Can I follow you up? Since so you and I think we would disagree here. So is it all right if I ask some follow-up questions?
Sure.
Here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic,
let me ask you. Could you give me 2 or 3 examples of where you find Jesus' teachings aligning more with what we might see with progressive policies?
Sure. Yeah. Certainly. So, all right. Let's see.
And take your time. No worries.
I'm just wondering how much of a line I'm going to step on. That's
apparently our first guest for Talking with Strangers. I learned after the fact is like a Marxist, and we didn't even really get into political discussions. And the scheduler was kind of hoping we would, but it didn't. I guess I didn't ask the right questions.
Interesting.
So go ahead, drop any landmines or even nukes, if you want.
Certainly. Okay. Well, let's start with some easy ones. Since the midterms just happened, one of the things I try to think about when I go to the ballot box, right? Well, and actually in Oregon, it's mail-in voting.
Is it exclusively mail-in?
But
wow.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. It's incredible. I'm only saying that it's incredible because I don't have to take off time from work like I had to when I was in Michigan or Colorado or anywhere to go to the ballot box. I think it makes it far more accessible. And they haven't found, I think the last statistic was like 0.01% of voter fraud happened in the 2018 elections via the Oregon mail-in ballot system. And it happened because they found a guy who was stuffing, envelopes of deceased people that he knew, and he happened to be conservative. So
it happens on both sides, sadly. Yeah,
it happens on both sides.
Before you drop a landmine or a nuke, let me say, I think one solution to the voting day is to actually just make it a national holiday, and
I think that would be fantastic. Actually, that would be much more accessible to people. And I wish I have trouble understanding why they haven't gone to that system yet in politics, because it seems like a no-brainer to me. But in lieu of that, I really enjoy mail-in.
Sure. Okay, so tell me, give me a few issues for you.
Yeah. So when I go to the ballot box, and I did this, or when I filled out my ballot here in Oregon for mail-in voting, I use as a guide the first sermon that Jesus preached. When he stood up in the synagogue and he read from the scroll of Isaiah, and he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to proclaim good news to the poor, to proclaim healing for the sick, to proclaim sight for the blind, and to proclaim the breaking of chains for the captive." Right? And those are some of the defining things, I think, as Christians that we need to look at, because those really define Jesus's ministry throughout the Gospels. Right? So I think of, and everyone is going to have a different opinion on this. Right. But I think of things like often progressives are associated with the idea of healthcare for all. Right. And I think at its core, and we can disagree about praxis and how it plays out, but I think at its core, providing healthcare as a fundamental human value for everyone in our country is a net good, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not the one in charge with figuring out how to how to make the finances work for it. But we have certainly seen in other progressive countries this works very well. And I think that, healthcare for all is just a no-brainer from a standpoint of viewing the teachings through the lens of Jesus. I also think that things like, I don't.
Well, if we can, let's just start with healthcare, if that's all right.
Yeah, no, let's start with healthcare, sure.
And just this is a question of inquiry. So, you would say that when Jesus proclaimed that, he wasn't calling for a government system in which people would be taxed in order to cover or have the government even run the medical industry. Is that fair? But you would say that
certainly.
You would say that this is an application.
I think that would
of Jesus' teaching to do so, right?
I believe that this is hi, sorry, my dog is getting up in my lap now. I believe that this is an application, I guess is a good way to put it. Of course, we can't remove Jesus from his first century history and context. The challenge for Christians today is to see Jesus and see our responsibility as citizens and as humans when we vote in politics, and how can we most closely align with the values of providing for the poor and the outcast and the hurting and the sick. Of course, Jesus is not coming in and saying, let's make a healthcare for all system, because Jesus doesn't expect the broken system to fix a broken system. But that doesn't mean that we get to just say, well, healthcare for all is not something that, that I think we should do because, it goes against my personal beliefs. If something helps people as Christians at a fundamental level, we're called to stand for that thing.
Yeah. Well, I would agree with how you phrased that. Interestingly enough, I've got no problem with that as it's written. Although I think you probably mean it something a little different than how I would mean it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Right.
Nuanced,
and for me, I share the concern that the cost of healthcare is outrageous, and interestingly enough, I don't think that any of the solutions that have been put forward, I think we're dealing with systemic issues. And what is interesting is probably how you and I have such drastically different takes on it. And let me give one example here. This was a few years back, and it was about the EpiPen cost going up. And it was
sure. This is a personal
is that
one
right?
for
So
me.
I think, lo and behold, it was Senator Manchin's daughter ran some firm that owned the rights to the EpiPen, and
that doesn't surprise me.
Well, but okay, great, yes. So, so one of my concerns is basically the idea of corporatism that occurs in American government, which is where a lot of these big businesses, including the healthcare industry, so big pharma, is in bed with these political officials. And so they write, the lobbyists, they're the ones crafting the legislation. A lot of people don't know this. Our politicians, even the staff of the politicians, don't craft legislation anymore. It's the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. who send it to the staffer, who then gives it to the politician. And they've got these bills, which are, 1,500 pages, and they don't even read them. So I think we're just dealing with systemic issues here. But so I see these concerns with big pharma and basically incentivizing these corporations and giving them monopolies. Why is it that we don't have general drugs to compete with some of these things? Why is it that you can only buy the EpiPen and not, say, an alternative, put out by CVS or Walgreens? So, it's like we've got the generic brand for Tylenol and Advil. You can get those things, over the counter, or
Yeah.
on the wall. So why don't we have those things for the others? And
So my counter.
no, I was
yeah.
going to say, I
Sorry,
just think,
go ahead. Finish your thought.
I think
I
that
apologize. I don't want to
competition
interrupt
can
you.
be good and drive down those costs. It forces the company, in order to compete,
Certainly.
to lower the price. And so I would be very interested to see how would competition entering the medical marketplace lead to lower costs for consumers, such as yourself.
Sure. So, like, for instance, with the EpiPen, it's a great example. So I have a shellfish allergy, right? That is pretty dangerous. If I even eat something
You would
cooked
make
on the
a
same
good
grill as
ancient
with
Israelite.
shellfish, I could go into
But,
anaphylactic shock. I would, yes. Yeah, right. I don't carry an EpiPen with me, though. It's been recommended by my doctor because the stupid things wear out in 6 months. They cost $2,000 a pop, even with my health insurance that I have through my employer, which is, relatively good health insurance. That's ridiculous to me. I don't have $2,000 every 6 months to spend on something that I may need, once every 2 years kind of issue, right? So I'm just hyper vigilant about not eating shellfish. But there are people who are not as lucky as me with their allergies and their conditions that could have far worse consequences far more often, that have to carry EpiPens on them. I mean, it's not even a choice, right? So my counter to that claim, and I would also say that I wouldn't consider Joe Manchin or his family
he's a moderate Dem,
Those are part of the Democratic Party. Yeah, he's pretty moderate. And he's got to, he wants to hold on to his seat as much as he can, and so he's got to really play at both sides of the field there. And that's fine. That's how politics works, right? So I would argue that in the last 50 years of us as a country, competition in the medical field, or I guess what the broad overarching umbrella that you would call capitalism, right, has led us to this system of people being able to amass monopolies in the medical space and in all spaces too, to be honest, especially when it comes to utilities for people to live in. There is one power company that I can go through in Oregon here to get my power to my house, and if I don't like their prices, I can just not have power in my house, right? But we live in a time where over the last 50 years, people have been allowed to consolidate power in the capitalist marketplace in pursuit of things like innovation, right? As the claim that if we allow them to merge with other companies and take over these smaller competitors, they're able to do these things. I see that as a direct outpouring of capitalism in America, not as the antithesis.
So we do have antitrust laws which prevent monopolies, and sometimes deals are thrown out by the government, by a judge, because the judge thinks that it would constitute a monopoly. So even though we have a capitalist society, I mean, I'm more comfortable calling it a market economy, and even then a modified market economy, because we are, I mean, and maybe this is where we might have differences in how we describe it. I would say we actually have a highly regulated market. You might think it's not regulated enough.
I agree it's not regulated.
Yeah, so
I would say it's not.
It's highly regulated from my vantage point. But you said capitalism has led us to this system, and I think on healthcare, I have a different take, at least specifically as it pertains to that. On healthcare, I think that the highly regulated market economy has led us to this system. I think that regulation has actually led to the price hikes and the increases, because it prevents competition. When the government basically protects a pharmaceutical company from having any competitors enter the marketplace. And the EpiPen's an example of that. It's like, imagine, you gave the example of the utility company. Imagine if the government prevented a company from offering electricity against the business that you have there. That's what's happened in many of these cases in the medical industry.
Yeah, but in many of these cases, the opposite is true. The government hasn't really prevented it, but it's become, because of the allowance for companies to buy up their competition. It has become a thing in which you can, buy up all your competition, or anybody who has any better ideas than you.
That is a great example that a lot of people are aware of. Yeah, Meta now. Facebook buys out Instagram and WhatsApp, and now they're Meta.
Yeah. Sure, right? And the government isn't stepping in to stop these, right? Which you would think, a common sense person looking at Facebook and Instagram combining their powers, right, and Meta buying that company would say that is gonna not be good for the marketplace in the long run, right? But the government didn't step in to do that. They're only just now stepping in as the problem has gotten so ridiculous, because whoever has the money to do these things can do what they want. They can buy out their competition, and that's a problem. I think that's a situation in where more regulation is needed, where situations like what we have now with Meta could be avoided.
I've got two things
could have been avoided
here, and this is fun. I hope you're having fun.
I'm having a great time.
Good. So what's interesting about the Meta situation, if you look at the stock price year to date,
sure,
it's gone down 70%, and so investors have lost a substantial amount of confidence in Meta's long-term outlook.
Yeah.
Such that now Zuckerberg announced, it may have been yesterday.
Yeah, it was just
he's
recently.
Cutting 11,000 jobs, yep. Which is a real bummer for the people that were employed by Meta.
Yeah.
But in a sense, the market's responding. The market is issuing a corrective that, hey, this company was too big, and we're worried about its long-term viability. It's having trouble bringing young people in, and
now. So much of that with Meta, their situation around the metaverse is I think, largely to blame for the investors losing faith in them. Because Mark Zuckerberg has this idea that the metaverse is going to be the next big thing, and it's not.
That's right.
However, I don't know that we would have had as contentious elections had in 2016, right? Had Facebook not owned Instagram and WhatsApp, and been, in essence, one of the 3 or 4 places where people can go to social media companies, right? See, I think the problem stems far earlier than now, and the market correction to me now is too little, too late.
Interesting. Yeah, I've got to think more about that.
That's fine. That's fair.
But I want to go to the second point. Yeah. Well, and I'm certainly with you. The fact that Facebook would allow, any sort of ads, for example, ads by Russians, for example.
Oh yeah.
There's that concern. And there's a whole big debate there about whether social media is a utility company even.
Yep.
And should be regulated as such. So that's a whole nother discussion. But to my second point, and going back to broader than just social media, the concept of mergers and acquisitions. So how would you regulate, what would constitute as an acceptable level of a company buying out a smaller company that may have some innovating idea
certainly,
or product that the larger company wants to own?
Yeah, certainly. Obviously there's got to be some space for this to happen, right? There's got to be somewhere where a larger company can buy a smaller company for the idea that the smaller company wants to sell, right? And that's I think good at its core. The problem is when you look at companies who are already so massive and so mega, and any small competition comes up, it's really actually kind of interesting that and I know there have been offers for it, but it hasn't happened yet, and it probably won't happen ultimately. But I know Meta did try to buy TikTok out and I believe Twitter attempted to at one point too, because they saw that the fast subscription growth there. I'm sorry, I keep going back to social media. I'm a youth pastor. It's all the teens talk about.
Sure.
So I apologize.
No worries.
But let me try to take this out of the realm of social media, I suppose.
Yeah, so when you say just a company is so mega, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so
there's got to be a certain
I think what
percentage.
you're calling for is like, yeah, we have antitrust laws,
Yeah.
And so you're just, and feel free to interrupt or correct, but you're basically saying we just need to lower that bar as to what constitutes a company too big to acquire some product or business.
Yeah, I think if we're gonna try to build a country on the idea that anyone can enter the marketplace and have a fair shake at it, right? We have to build in some equity into the system for smaller companies. And so there has to be protections against predatory behavior by large companies. We have to lower the bar for what it means for a company to have market share value, right? I mean, in order to really get classified by our antitrust laws now as a monopoly, you have to own something ridiculous like 91% of the industry. and that's just way too high of a bar to clear. At that point it's too late in my view. So that would be my I guess view on it. If we're going to try to do it this way, let me see if we can find
some common ground then. So let's see here. Imagine we're both lawmakers. I'm going to put out a proposal for you. So a lot of these big corporations, they end up paying nothing in corporate taxes.
Yeah.
And the reason why, if I understand it correctly, is because they utilize all of the tax breaks to their benefit, right? So they're paying zero taxes legally, right? This is perfectly legal.
Yeah, I think it's a combination
of course, they're the corporations moving billions of dollars around.
Yeah, it's a combination of utilizing tax breaks that are legal in the system and then moving money to places where, they can't be taxed on it too, which is legal in the most technical sense of the term, I think, but it's definitely shady and it's definitely unethical.
Yeah, I'm aware of individuals doing that. I am not so aware of businesses doing that. Perhaps they are, but certainly they're using these tax breaks. So here, in the interest of reaching across the aisle, let's write a law together and pass it together that says something like, we'll lower that percentage from 91% to say 80%.
Sure.
And we'll even close some of these tax loopholes.
Yeah.
That way we've got so one of my big concerns, especially as more of a free market guy, is the national debt.
Sure.
And so I want to get that paid down. So it sounds like you would be open to lowering that antitrust threshold with taking away some of the tax breaks for businesses.
Yeah.
Not for individuals, but for businesses. And gosh, what would I get out of this? Because it sounds like you'd sign.
I was gonna say, it sounds like I get everything out of this. I don't know what.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, I'd have to. Okay, and I'd want there to be more competition then.
Sure.
So there would be some deregulation that occurs.
Yeah.
I can think, especially with big pharma.
Sure.
So. That's what I'd have to. I'd craft more legislation about that.
So I mean, I suppose my proposal to you would be everything that you gave me, and we take some of that money that was allocated from tax breaks, and we use it to pay off national debt, right?
Sure. It's not earmarked otherwise.
Right. Yeah. It's not earmarked otherwise. It's some percentage level of it, right, or whatever. And I think that's a good.
Yep.
I think that's a very good bipartisan trade-off for the system that we have here.
Yeah, it sounds like you win in that one until I can maybe throw in something else.
It really does, doesn't it? That's why I like it.
But so, sure. Getting to back to something you said earlier about, believing we as Christians need to call out other parties. As a conservative, I've been severely disappointed with the GOP the past 20 years as the GOP has talked about being fiscally responsible. Yeah. And yet spends money but doesn't find ways to pay for it, just takes out debt. And so I just think the GOP has been fiscally irresponsible, And
that
yeah,
is
so
certainly that has certainly been on both sides, though. I mean,
well, right, yeah, it occurs on both sides.
Yeah.
And what the real strange thing too, when you get into economic theory, is Obama was a Keynesian. He frequently
Sure.
touted that economist, Milton Keynes. And what's interesting about Keynesian economic theory was, in the good times you pay the debt off.
Yeah.
But that hadn't happened.
Yep.
So it's like,
Sure.
it was almost just like an excuse just to keep spending money and kicking the can down the road for the next generation.
Yeah.
And I think our generation, and even the younger generation now, late teens, early 20s, what we're inheriting is just a fiscal mess.
Oh, yeah.
From our parents.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's going to be interesting to see how it goes in terms of the solutions toward that. But
I think
it's really a bad outlook.
Yeah. For the last 20, probably the last 50 years, honestly, in American history, I think the assumption from many politicians, regardless of what they say out front, has been that America's debt is just too big to fail, which is a dangerous place to be. However, and that's a bad place to be. So there's this big, like you said, financial mess that our generations are inheriting and have inherited. And man, that a solution to that problem has to be so multifaceted and so many parted.
Yep.
There's no one perfect solution to that answer. And in some ways,
so okay, let me bring up another example, because you
Yeah.
brought up the too big to fail, which was a line frequently used during the financial crisis back in 08 and in 09.
Yeah, and again, I think that's a bad line to use in the American economy. It gets proven disastrous multiple times.
Right. Okay. So do you recall what happened?
Yeah.
I mean, you would have been a late teen, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you recall what happened with these banks that were too big to fail? Do you remember what happened to solve the crisis there?
Oh yeah, the government bailed them out.
That's right.
Yep.
So the government gave them money, and guess what happened? The CEOs got their multi-$100 million bonuses.
Oh yeah.
And these big banks are now bigger than ever.
Yep.
And so this is why me, as a free market guy, gets really passionate and annoyed about this.
Sure.
Because there was a list of X amount of banks at the top that got this money, and then the banks beneath that didn't get the money, and those businesses failed.
Yep.
For me, it's neither a free market nor is it a fair market, because
Sure.
the mid-size and small banks got nothing.
Yep.
And so, I see this as government intervention in the marketplace, and basically ruining the market. Picking
Certainly.
banks it wants to win and banks it doesn't want to win. And
Yep.
again, this is the corporatism. This is because those banks paid lobbyists to go get those funds. Sorry, I'm getting a little passionate here about
No, you're
this.
good, man.
But, so that's why, to me, the solution there was actually to let the big banks fail, because the mid-size and the small banks would have bought out the quote-unquote good debt that it could carry, and it would help alleviate. So some of those big banks may not have failed, but would have downsized accordingly.
Sure.
And I think the market would have naturally found its way to becoming stable again. So even though there was a financial crisis, the bailout, the taxpayer bailout, I don't think it certainly wasn't the only solution, and I don't think it was the best one. I'm not sure what your take is on that. Maybe you share the same concern as me.
I think we have
but a
similar
different solution.
concerns in that realm. Yeah, and maybe a different solution. I'm not going to pretend like I know how to solve the 2008-2009 housing crisis, because that was a mess. And there are people much smarter than me who didn't know how to solve it. So, I think that bailing out mega corporations is inherently wrong. When I say that I lean progressive, I would love to see those corporations burned to the ground.
So it sounds like you and I see eye to eye there.
I think we would. Yeah.
I'd happily see a big business fail if it ran its business poorly.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, certainly. I would agree with that. However, I think, or this would be, I guess, I guess my question is why would the government, right, have this interest, aside from lobbying? Obviously there's a lot of lobbying that's going on. Why would they have this interest in ensuring that these giant corporations don't fail, right, and then basically give them this free pass to do whatever they want, which is what's happening in I think a lot of different sectors even today too. I think about the housing market and rental prices that are just skyrocketing, and nobody is stepping in to say, I think that we have a system, whether you call it capitalism or free market or modified market economy. The system we have built now is really, really shaky, and it allows people to take advantage of it to only further their greed, which ultimately, in most economy theories, that's going to end up being what happens, right? That's the problem with Marxism, was that it allowed people to feed their greed at the top, right? The problem with late stage American capitalism is that it has allowed people to line their pockets and feed their greed.
Yeah, you get greed either way.
You get greed either way.
Yeah, human nature.
I don't know that there's a through road around greed, right? In humanity, this side of heaven. So as a Christian, and to bring it back to Christian theology and practice, I think we have to look at that and understand that there is no government system that is going to fix this mess that we're in, right? Essentially, I think, especially on the American side of things, we're playing a game where we're trying to mitigate damage as best as we can to marginalized communities. At least that would be my view of it, right? And ultimately, I would love to believe that my vote and my voice counts enough to prevent something like the 2008-2009 financial crisis. But the reality is that it doesn't. And I think either party in power would have done the same thing. Ultimately, we have a big problem here. So my view, I guess, my politics, I'm trying to look at what is best for my neighbors who are struggling to make ends meet, right? I'm trying to look at what's best for the teenagers who are going off into this just absolutely egregious system we've inherited, and they can't, on a minimum wage job, even come close to making rent in the smallest of apartments in my city. That's a problem, right? So yeah, that would be my political view. That would be my political views on this.
I mean, it sounds like we share a lot of the same concerns. Economically, politically, even theologically, we share a lot of these same concerns. Politically, we have some different solutions to that. Theologically, it sounds like we have the same solution there. We realize that some of these problems aren't going to be solved, until Christ's return, but
that doesn't stop us from working towards some kind of small level solution.
That's right. Yeah, agreed there. Yeah, and we need to keep our eyes set on the hill for Jesus' return, because some people have their eyes set on the hill for Trump's return, or I mean, I know there was a lot of people who thought Obama was going to solve a lot of the problems, and there was a lot of change, financial, structural changes that were passed into law. Then healthcare. The Affordable Care Act, was passed, and yet here we still are. So one thing I hope people realize, regardless of their party situation, is that their political leaders are not their saviors. And so we want to, I think you and I are both have that concern, and we want to point people to Jesus instead of political leaders as the saviors. So then certainly,
and the problem is when you have, I think, and the last. I'm hoping that we're coming out of this now. I really am. And I believe the GOP is beginning to come out of this, the kind of fever dream they've been in for the last, 10 years or so. But, I think about, so I went to Liberty University, right? Founded by
Jerry Falwell Sr.
Jerry Falwell, thank you. Yeah, Jerry Falwell Sr., right? And the moral majority and all of that. Those were all political movements at their core. To attempt to seize control of America as a nation and create it into the idea of a Christian nation, which I think is absolutely absurd. And ultimately, what we saw in Trump in a lot of evangelical circles is the church co-signing everything that it hated in order to gain political power. And I think of, I think of the first century, or I think of the 3rd century Christians when Constantine rose to power and claimed to be Christian, right? And they were like, well, this guy's not going to kill us, so like we should go with him, kind of thing. And the Christianity has been struggling to get out of bed with human systems ever since that has happened. And what we've seen in the last 4 years or 5 years or so, 6 years, whatever, we've been going through this, is the identification, like you said, of a political person as a savior. Trump's pastor, when he was in the White House, Laura White, I think was her name. I can't quite remember.
She was one
came
of those
out on
prosperity
stage.
gospel preachers, I think.
Yeah, and she came out and she just legitimately said, she was like, "Thank you, God, for providing us a savior in President Trump." And that is heresy to the highest degree. So I hope we can shake ourselves out of this fever dream. And the answer is not to believe that Joe Biden, because he's not going to fix that issue, or any other Democratic candidate is going to be the yin to Trump's yang, right? In the Christian space. But
well, it sounds like, if you're really keeping up with the political stuff, Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, he won by like 20 percentage points, and he's, I think, being seen as a option to compare against Trump.
That's going to be fascinating to me if he does, because if he does go against Trump, man, is he going to split the GOP? I mean, that is going to be bloody, and it's going to be a mess.
It's going to be a slugfest. Oh yeah. It's
going to be a slugfest. Yeah, and I don't know who wins in that scenario. Because
I think DeSantis
he has
wins.
mobilized Florida.
Yeah, so I'll go on my predictions here, and in 2 years or whatever, someone can find this clip. I think if the GOP is smart enough, so the errors of 2016 was Rubio and Cruz stayed in that primary race for too long and diluted the vote. If the GOP is smart enough, there's only one person that goes against Trump. And then everyone can get around the whole anti-Trump vote. What would happen in that case is you would get independent voters registering as Republican in order to vote for the primary for DeSantis, because it would be such a strong anti-Trump movement.
Oh, yeah.
You might even get Democrats temporarily becoming Republicans so they can vote in those primaries. I'm being totally dead serious. I bet
you're right.
I think that's what would happen, and I think DeSantis would pull it off. If it were just those two guys. If there's even just a third anybody, that throws it all out. So we'll see what happens. Chris, we've run out of time here, but I want to say it's been great to chat with you, and I think Chris is gonna try to show us here the cameras what we each look like.
Oh, there we go.
Nice. Good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you, man.
Is that a scarf?
No, it's just a cardigan. All
cardigan. Oh, I see. Okay, I couldn't tell if it was dreads for a second.
Oh no! I'm like you, man. I don't got nothing.
Oh, there you go.
There.
Nice. Yeah.
It's just cold where I am, so I'm.
We've had an unusually warm autumn so far, but I totally hear you. I'll be in my office with the hoodie on because my head's cold. People, they don't get it, man. They don't understand the head getting cold.
They really don't, man. Everybody, I'll wear my beanies in summer and stuff, and they're like, "Man, aren't you hot?" And I'm like, "No, I'm cold.
I'm with
all
you.
the time."
Yeah. Nice to see the musical instruments there. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all around, and
so you've got the whole lighting thing with the blue and the purple. Do you record videos? You've got a YouTube channel?
Oh, I should, man. I really should, but I don't. This is just really purely for my aesthetics when I'm producing music. Okay. But I really should do some YouTube videos or something, because it would be, it's a perfect setup for it, certainly.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's why I thought maybe if you do that, that's such a common, popular thing, is putting the lighting in back like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and these all change colors too. They can be crazy, but I didn't want to freak everybody out, while it was on.
Yeah. Cool. So, Chris, it's been great to chat with you. We'll be sure to put a link. I assume Kingdom Over Empire can be bought on Amazon. Is it available there?
Yep. Yep, it's available there. And then can I make one more plug?
Yes, go ahead.
So you're, I don't know what his role is in your organization, but I'm relatively close with Dante Stack. Him and I just wrote a book together and published it called Fun with Satan. That's on Amazon as well. So, but I was told by him not to mention that until the end. Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm his co-author there. So if you want to learn about Satan and, have some fun at it too, that's a great... It's a great book. That was our COVID project. It was really quite a lot of fun.
Nice, cool. Glad to hear that. Yeah, we'll put two links to each of those books so people can buy and check those out, and give them reviews on Amazon as well. So that helps the books sell.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yep. So wonderful, Chris.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for your time this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Kurt. Appreciate it, and looking forward to hearing more from you guys because it seems like you do good work.
Thanks. Yeah, likewise. God bless you. All right. Is that a wrap, Chris?
Yeah, it's a wrap.
Nice.